powerhouse panel with us today. So we have Katie Lamb, who's the MP for the Weald of Kent. And to my right, we have Sarah Jane Sewell, who is the Director of Digital Tories, Maria Exante, all the way on my left, Public Policy and Ethics for PwC. And then back to my right again, I kind of did a back and forth thing here, Camilla Coverley-Veal, who's the Policy Director for the Startup Coalition. And then I should introduce myself as well. My name is Elizabeth Seeger. I'm the Director of Digital Policy at Demos. So as I said, today we're going to be talking about AI in public services. It's been a very hot topic this year. AI is promising lots of productivity gains and opportunities for cutting costs in public services. But there's also really important discussion to be had about making sure that we're not just layering this technology on top of systems that need some fundamental changes. So today we'll be talking about how to bring together the productivity potential of these technologies with the changes that we need in public services. So to start off the event, we're going to go one by one through the panelists, have them introduce themselves, say a bit more about themselves, their interests, and where they're oriented. And also addressing the first question that is on our plate for today, which is very general. Just where do you see the opportunities for AI to help us realize the changes we need in our public services? So if it's all right, we'll start with you today, Katie.
Yes, sure. Hello, everybody. I'm Katie Lamb. I'm the Member of Parliament for the Weald of Kent, as Elizabeth very kindly introduced me. I am a new MP. I was elected in July this year. And I spent most of my career in the private sector. So I spent most of my career in finance. I worked on the equities markets. And then I actually ran a number of internal teams at my bank, including I was a product manager for a while. So I did some IT projects there. I also worked for an AI company. I worked for the AI company faculty, who do a lot of work with government as well as a provider. And I spent a couple of years in Number 10 and I spent a year in the Home Office. So I have so many thoughts on the opportunities for AI within our public services. I'll talk maybe just about because we could monologue the whole panel, and I promise you I won't do that. But I'll talk maybe just about the two areas that I know best, which is the Home Office and then what's being done in Kent at the local level. So the three main areas of the Home Office are crime, national security, and immigration, and there are huge opportunities for AI in all of those. Around on immigration, visas, passports, that whole system could pretty much be entirely automated, particularly as facial recognition gets more and more sophisticated. There is a classic opportunity it's called UKVI, the sort of visas and immigration part of the Home Office. And one of the themes that I will return to today is, doing what might seem to us kind of smaller scale interventions that are actually much easier to embed and for people to get their heads around. And e-gates is actually a classic example of a type of technology that we now just completely accept as a day-to-day change. And actually the facial recognition that's embedded in that has massively shortened wait times at particularly our airports. So that's visas. Facial recognition also very important in crime and in fact in national security. So identifying bad actors, finding where they might be. They used facial recognition. The Met Police used facial recognition kind of at scale for the first time at the Queen's funeral and then at the coronation of the King, and it was fantastically successful. We actually found several criminals that had been that the police had been looking for many years. So there are huge opportunities in all of those areas, and then also particularly for national security, but for crime as well, the ability for AI, which I'm using kind of in a layperson sense, machine learning as well, to process very large quantities of data and information is also incredibly important. If you are looking for the few slightly coded messages where people talk about building their homemade bomb in a huge volume of data and messages and information, there's a massive role for AI to play in that. And also, and particularly in crime and national security, these are actually matters of life and death, shortening those lead times and making it much faster to carry out those sorts of investigations. But, which, as I say, will be a theme, there's a huge amount of work in government, in the Home Office in particular, on what I call the really boring stuff. So the Home Office receives, and each minister in the Home Office receives, a huge volume of letters every day. And all the responses to those letters are drafted from scratch. So, if somebody gets in a letter, somebody literally presses whatever, Control N, and there's a doc1 in Word, and they will start writing that letter. The ability already that we see of like text generative AI to be able to produce drafts, to respond to things, you're always going to need, or certainly for the foreseeable future, you're going to need a person to look over those and check the tone and content and all of that kind of thing. But massive opportunities in that area as well. And then locally, what we're seeing in Kent is the county council there is trying or starting to embed AI in their work. The most obvious area is traffic and kind of speeding control and traffic management, working out volumes on different roads, all of that kind of thing. The type of modelling that would have taken PhD mathematicians many years of kind of boring rote work. Now you can get technology to do all the basic stuff, and then your PhD mathematicians just kind of do the interesting analysis on the top. So the short answer to what are the opportunities is they are legion, and I think we'll get into why some of them may or may not be more challenging to implement. But those are just some of the areas that I'm kind of most familiar with.
Awesome, thank you. And I like drawing out that idea too, like you still need the people in the loop for a lot of those processes, and we'll have questions around foundations of trust in AI, and I think that'll be central. So how about, can we move on to you, Sarah? What do you see as the opportunities for AI in public services?
I think it's speeding things up a little bit, and if anybody's ever worked in government procurement, they'll know that it's testing at times. Actually, I think we were talking about layering things up. I'm actually the fiance of a Bobby on the Beat in Brixton. And one of the biggest things that I've learned over the last year from him is that our approach to using tech in public services is doing a bit of a landlord special. If you're not familiar with a landlord special, it's just you just paint over and paint over and paint over, and then it's flaking away, and you need to start from scratch. So we really need to think about getting back to basics and probably starting from scratch a little bit, not completely, but being a bit more careful. And obviously, I've worked for several MPs. Casey, you're going to have this all to learn when all your constituents get in touch with all the things that are broken in local government and with all the government departments, and just seeing how actually inefficient and not user-friendly most things are. And there's been a risk so far that the government has tried to push things out really quickly without properly testing things, and it doesn't make it user-friendly. There's a lack of trust with the wider public. I think for most of us in the room, you're obviously interested in using this stuff, but for the average, Jenny, who lives in a village in the middle of nowhere in Lincolnshire, where I grew up, probably doesn't even have access to basic broadband, let alone, a computer or something. So we've got a long way to go, and I think we're going to obviously continue talking about this, but there's a risk that I will talk forever, so I will pipe down a little bit.
Lovely. And then Camilla.
Yes, so hello, my name is Camilla, and just to give you a very quick flavour of the organisation so you understand where I'm coming from. Startup Coalition used to be called Coadec, and we were founded by a bunch of entrepreneurs for entrepreneurs, so we're a free resource that tries to advocate for any startup in the UK ecosystem. And we were founded with the idea that if startups aren't at the sort of policymakers' table, then they're going to very quickly be on their menu, and the incumbents are going to try and block them out, and regulations and laws are going to stop them from growing and scaling. And I don't want to retread what my other panelists have said, because I frankly find it very boring when panelists just re-say something in different words, so I shall just say I agree with everything that's been said. And in terms of other opportunities, I think from sort of AI and more tech into procurement, particularly with AI, is I think one of the ways that on the global stage we shape what we think is ethical AI and what we think sort of the AI that we want in the Western world to be is through the way that we use it in our public services. So that's one of the other opportunities that I think is within that. Yeah.
I really like that angle, sort of the leading by example.
Yeah.
Let's use it the way we want to see the world use it. And last but certainly not least, Maria.
The panel is always late. Apology in advance. The trains in London have had a bit of a temperament this morning. So I work for PwC, and while many of you know what PwC does, I'm not in that part of PwC. I focus on public policy and ethics, and for the last 8 years, my focus on primarily on responsible AI. How can we understand what responsible AI is, and how can we deploy it safely? But before jumping into responsible AI, my background was a business owner. I hold an MBA, but also I've been involved in business and digital transformation. So this is my bread and butter. So my entry point in responsible AI was always to say, is this achievable? Can we really transform ourselves and how we operate alongside this amazing technology. And while my interaction with the public sector is very much through the lenses of public policy engagements with DCMS and with DCIT and with a host of regulators, with Demos, with Ada Lovelace, with anyone who participates in this space. What I'm here to say is that there is a lot of learning that can be leveraged from how industry, private sector is in the midst of transforming how they operate to be able to accommodate the special requirements AI brings. And when it comes to opportunities for the public sector, I would say that obviously efficiency, productivity, AI promises the promise that has been awaited for centuries by capitalists and business people alike, because it promises to achieve something that no other technology or no other intervention has been able to, productivity. But in the same time, it's not just about productivity, it's about quality of service. Public sector customers are patients, students, citizens, and there's no other area in society where responsible AI is more important. And probably the biggest opportunity, besides achieving in a paced approach this transformation, is leading by example. I think the industry needs to see the government being able to demonstrate how well it implements responsible AI and how it goes above and beyond regulation, and being able to tap into mandatory transparency requirements, for example, that will achieve so much. It's unbelievable how much it can be achieved by just mandating transparency on different layers. And by doing so, I'm hoping that the industry itself will become a little bit more disciplined and more incentivized to follow suit. And obviously, the last, probably the most important one, rebuild trust. We know that there is a erosion trust in public sector, and that is not beneficial for anyone, including private sector. So potentially, this could be a saving grace to start rebuilding trust in the government by demonstrating how AI makes a difference. And I want to give you an example I've been sharing across the channels, because it's not a news you usually see as being celebrated. When we talk about AI, there's a lot of assumption and a lot of noise made by experts and whomever has the loudest voice, but we don't celebrate successes. And perhaps you've heard that the AI tool used to diagnose breast cancer is going into full implementation across NHS. At least that's what the media is saying. I want to see more use cases like this. They might not make a profound transformation how we operate, but will actually show the people what AI is capable of.
Yeah, I think that's a really central point too, is there's sort of this, at least I feel like there's this mounting sense of show us the money happening a bit. There's been lots and lots of talk about AI, but we're at a time now where people want to show us what is it doing?
Exactly.
What is it doing for us? Wonderful. I mean, there's so much content here to talk about. We have trust in AI, digital transformation, procurement, and actually, I think let's start off with some of this procurement discussion, because I feel like it really ties together a lot of these subjects. So, the UK has a long history of IT projects being rolled out, and some of them not going so well, shall we say. So we have this history of public services that's sort of littered with the gravestones of some failed major IT projects. Sometimes this is because the costing is way more than expected, and then it's not delivered. So I was reading earlier today about a project that's actually right here in Birmingham, where the Birmingham City Council wanted to roll out an Oracle IT system as a major cost-saving, efficiency-boosting program. It's supposed to be a £19 million budget with £100 million of savings, and ended up having very few savings and costing £100 million. So something fell apart here. It didn't work as well. And then there's also times where systems themselves just fail to detrimental effect, and we've seen this around the Horizon scandal. So my question to the panel is, how can we avoid some of these kinds of major IT disasters when we start rolling out AI? And what's the role of procurement in this? Maybe this is a good place to start with. Yes, Camilla.
Sure, I'm happy to say that. So procurement is one of the hardest things that we work on, partly because it's a bit like a game of whack-a-mole. So you sort of think you've solved one issue, which is like, the procurement process is way too slow for most startups and it costs them a bomb. So you think, right, we'll give the government some recommendations, and then you suddenly realize, well, there's competition issues. So I'm very, very wary of giving you like a sort of just fix this one thing, this one quick trick, and we'll be done. But I do think one of the issues within procurement, particularly with IT, that is a problem is that you get lots and lots of big incumbents and companies offering bespoke solutions when you've got loads of startups, loads of other tech companies that have got things that are proven in the market. They're off the shelf, they're SaaS, they can scale quite quickly depending on what the government needs, and they could just buy them. And instead, you've got a procurement process that often incentivizes people to say, well, I can build this wonderful bespoke solution for you. The government does not need half the time, I think, a bespoke solution. And so you've got really weird rules. And I know sometimes the Procurement Act that is about to come into force is going to change some of this. But at the moment, you've got really weird rules where you've got startups telling us, well, we said, could we give a live demo? And the procurement official was like, well, no, because that could influence my decision. And you're thinking, well, yeah. So I think there are bits there to unpick, but I'm not suggesting that is the silver bullet, and I do not think that's the only solution, but I do think that is a large element of it.
Yeah.
I was going to say that the Birmingham example is a great one, and what I think is really interesting about that is it was the first major upgrade they had made to their IT system since 1999.
Yeah.
So, if we think about where the tech world was in 1999, internet was still dial-up. We were on Windows 95. The iPhone was like 8 years away. It was not even, I don't think, a speck in Steve Jobs' imagination. And so, to build on what Camilla was saying, I always can't believe I'm saying this as a criticism, but government is almost too ambitious about what it can do. Wait, and then it wants to transform everything at the cost of tens of millions of pounds. And to think about sort of tech in general and products and the project management and waterfall versus agile, if that kind of means anything to the people in the room, government is currently between procurement and kind of value for money rules not set up to make small regular changes and updates. We should never be in a position where we're leaving IT systems a quarter of a century before they're being upgraded, because this will happen. That once you get to that scale of upgrade, is going to fall over. And that happens in the private sector too. So I think what those examples teach us is we will need to, I think, loosen the reins on, even at a departmental level, the kind of central planning of IT upgrades. And in a way, to come back to AI, it's brilliant for that kind of thing. Like if you obviously have to do this in a way that is secure and maybe hosted on your own servers or however it might work. But, if there are different teams, say in the Home Office or in planning or wherever it might be, that actually do want to use AI to draft their letters, and they can try that out at relatively low cost because it's a kind of buy rather than a build, and they then become more productive. That's something that you can then think about rolling out across the department, rather than what is the solution that will work for all of the thousands of civil servants who work in my department. Unless it works for them, we're not going to do it.
Yeah, and I think with procurement, as you point out, like the procurement process itself takes quite a long time.
Yeah.
And then these investments are so large that it's like, okay, now we're going to use this thing for 10 years or 20 years.
Yeah.
Which then makes it even harder to adjust on the other side. But I think part of this, like, we have procurement rules for a reason. A lot of this has to do with making sure the systems are safe so that hopefully things like Horizon scandal don't happen. How do we balance this loosening of the reins with maintaining trust in the systems?
On Horizon specifically, and I don't want to sort of monopolize, obviously other panelists might want to comment on this. On Horizon specifically, I am really wary. Like what happened, the problem with Horizon is that the people involved were dishonest, arguably to the point of criminality. And that's why the situation was perpetuated in the way that it was. The problem was actually not the technology. Most IT systems fail some of the time. I think if the bar that we're going to set is everything has to be tested to the point that it is like impossible to break it and every use case will work, we'll never meet that bar. Like there is no technology that can meet that bar, AI or otherwise. What happened with Horizon is a case of sort of institutional rotting, and that could happen the very, very, very best procurement system will not get around people who want to break the rules, because that's how systems work. And that's kind of what we observe. And every time these things happen, we add some more rules. So the people who are playing by the rules are then penalised by the rules because they've got to comply with the rules. And the people who aren't playing by the rules don't care. It's not break them anyway.
Yeah.
So I'm cautious we have to be pragmatic about, the influence that it's had on the public view. But things like Horizon are not about technology.
Mhm. Yeah, there's a lot going on in there, but has presented this case where we do need to rebuild trust in this process. So I think coming to this topic of trust in AI then, and the risk aversion that we have around systems and in these procurement processes, so that we can be less risk averse, so that we can be more flexible. I feel like yeah.
I think honesty is really important, and that's one thing that's perhaps been lacking. And if people can't trust you, then they're not going to trust the systems. It's the same thing with any part of life. You have to be wary of that, but I don't know.
And I think that includes saying this might not work the first time.
Yeah.
I'll go back to procurement a little bit, because I think we are approaching procurement with the waterfall mindset, and we are in the age of AI ecosystem. So if you look at technology adoption, we've had a long stage of waterfall, which was very painful, the era of ERP and CRMs that will take to implement and will cost 10 times as much. And then we move into an agile era, more or less, where we see with like the beginning of the era of today, where we see that there is a fragmentation of the platform, and we need to start building capacity to manage a high number of providers. In the past, you'll just have to work with likes of SAP and Oracle. Now, God help us all, we have thousands of possible applications to manage. And the next stage will be the ecosystem age, where we need to learn of every different level of organization to work with within an ecosystem. And that's a key learning we've learned in PwC. It's like we didn't know how to do this. First of all, being able to horizon scan the market for the most reliable solution. How do you cut through the marketing spiel and understand what solution is the best for what you're looking for? And that's where you need to bring your data science team, because they are the only one able to conduct some sort of due diligence on those platforms. And even at times, they themselves might not be able to catch all the little nitty-gritty details you might discover in times. Then you need to be able to have the ability to innovate, to conduct as many experiments. That is the one will save you, because that is your interaction with the tool. You don't have to jump to apply or to implement something at scale. You have the opportunity to play with it in various contexts, in some sort of what's the name for experimentation? Sandboxing. Thank you. My brain is still not up yet. Sandboxing before you procure, and somehow build that agility within your procurement function, because otherwise you won't be able to cope with the amount of the flood of solution that are designed for various use cases that's coming. And it's not even obvious in the mainstream news, but if you have the time to check the influencers on TikTok, on LinkedIn, it's mind-blowing how many applications are coming and how cool they are and how fit for purpose. And I'm sure they are, because they are built on foundational models, and we know there is a huge international effort to build resilience and safety within those foundational models that are in fact foundational to any use case. I think we'll be in a better position to start trusting AI a little bit more if at the origin we are performing those tests and risk mitigations before we jump in adopting it. And I think that's how to think about building trust. It's first of all understand that we live now in a supply chain in a complex ecosystem, and we need to understand the relationship between. CMA has done some wonderful work in trying to map the ecosystem. They even have a map to show the relationship between frontier model builders and some big tech players, and it's mind-blowing to see the relationship that exists in between those players. So check it out. It's one of their important foundational models, and I think that's one. And lastly, and very importantly, Sarah's mentioned is transparency. So Cabinet Office, I think, was GDS probably 5 years ago. Easy tool, aim to collect information about where algorithm systems are being used across the civil service, the public service. And then the information is organized in 2 tiers. Tier 1 is for general public, and tier 2 is for deep domain experts. And having this algorithm transparency standard mandatory across the public sector, so the government knows where AI is being experimented, where AI is being trialed or is being used, it will give not only the government more grasp that they are holding or they are managing, they have some sort of a grasp around how AI is being experimented, used across the government, but also the public will have the visibility on what's going on with the government. And I think at the moment, it's fair to say the government itself is in no position to know what's going on. But I think that's not something unique to the government. Many of our clients have been in this position. Because Gen AI has thrown up things in the air, and everyone experiments with Gen AI, everyone wants to play with it, and even if their apps are not approved by their employee, they're still going to do it because people are people, and they will love to play a bit with a new toy. So I think transparency will get us a very long way, and it's not such a hard job to do. It's just taking something that exists already and making mandatory across the governments, and you'll give everyone a very solid start.
Probably getting departments to actually talk to each other.
Absolutely.
Shock, horror that they have to do that.
Shock, a horror to discover they work with the same supplier and they
Well,
have
this
to
is the
sign like.
thing. And then you'll find out that one department will be, I don't know, sorry, I'm losing my voice a bit. I've done too much talking over the last few days. One department might be sandboxing far ahead of another department. So you could have, say, I don't know, satellite imaging service that DEFRA's got it, Ministry of Defence have got it, Ministry of Defence are way ahead of DEFRA. But because they're not talking to each other, they end up with lots of different contracts, which they're not talking to each other, so they don't know what position they're in down the line. It's also a lot more expensive, which is not good for the taxpayer, and it's not good for government. It's not good for.
That's very true. I mean, some of the part of the proposal sounded like AI, so I deleted them. It's quite recent that people thought AI was a good word.
AI is nothing new, and we're talking about it's like some mystical crystal.
They're not allowed. I discovered this. It was one of the things with governments relative to that was that they weren't allowed in the procurement process, because we were bidding for this system. I said, well, you've got my stuff on your desk. You know, you just go and put to Jim. He's got it. And he'll tell you it doesn't cause widespread anarchy and chaos. I think it's almost exactly what I said. And no, we can't do that. And you just have to believe this because it's true. The vendors get to choose who their references are. They're not allowed to ring up DEFRA or the MOD. They're specifically forbidden under the procurement rules from doing this, which is why people buy Oracle. I'm an IT professional. Oracle. Actually, if they'd named another database, I would have assumed it was Oracle anyway, and that the journalist merely got the name of it wrong. But one of the sites I write for had a thing where we said, basically, which technology vendor do you hate most? And it was something like 47% was Oracle, and the other 53% was Microsoft, VMware, Intel put together. And anyone who works in technology knows this. You know, not to know this would be prima facie evidence of incompetence. And that's the problem, especially with government systems, that you can't have a better customer, a better supplier than you have customer. And when I talk to senior civil servants in my other work, it's actually quite strange when I meet someone who has some understanding of technology beyond things you could read in the Times. Really, I mean, they're not uneducated people, but they don't get it. They don't read the technology press. So the idea that someone could evaluate a vendor not having read anything about you know, and there is the people who are quite really bad. And the danger here, if we're going to go down AI, the reason Oracle has that stranglehold on certain devices is they got there first. For most firms, the first big enterprise database they had was an Oracle system. And changing your database is like an organ transplant. There's a good chance. I mean, companies have been wiped out, simply just stopped working. WH Smith was nearly destroyed by a database upgrade. And the AI systems you're bringing in every single one of them is different. OpenAI has made no assertion that any version of the things you build on it will work with the next version.
So, do you mind if we go back to the panel discussion?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
I mean, there were some really excellent points there, and I think, especially on this topic of, like you said, you have these massive systems, and I like the organ transplant example, but maybe going over to my right-hand side of the table over here, and this question of how can we harness small and medium enterprise potential more around putting in new opportunities, and I think it comes back to this point of being able to facilitate more flexibility, but like any key things that would come out from you.
Yeah, I think it comes down to first order and second order problems. First order problems are things like, going back to my not one silver bullet, things like making it quicker, thinking about your data infrastructure, for example, and cutting down on complexity, and sort of simple things like the fact that we have over 22,000 governments, and some of them charge you to be on them. So it's it takes years. There are lots of startups just kind of get shunted into pilots. The pilot goes really well, and then they say, can I now apply for the proper contract? And occasionally the government will turn around and say, well, no, because you were in the pilot, so we don't want you to be part of the overall contract. It's dumb things like that. Upskilling people who are buying the technology as well. And then I think, you've got second order problems, which come down to things that are not, I think, immediately apparent if you were to focus on helping startups and SMEs. Things like competition, things like really basic things like, going back to the Oracle example, for example, you can have system integrators that are working with the government, and they tell startups, we don't want to integrate with you. So even though the startup can apply for the contract, even though the government may want them to, it's the system integrators who said, well, we don't want to integrate with you. So then they're cut off. So it's elements like that where you wouldn't immediately think, oh, I need to solve that in order to solve technology procurement, but it factors in. And then I think there are some, I shall just finally say that I think there are some government departments and some elements of the NHS who are doing really, really interesting things with startups, where they do, for example, challenge prizes, where you pay startups for each stage that they get through. And that really helps when a startup is like, well, actually, in order just to apply for this contract and to even attempt to do it, it would cost me a ton, and I can't quite afford to do that. But if you pay them for each stage, work with them during that stage to think about what is the solution we want. A lot of people think about bits and pieces like that, but you can see when I say this is one of the hardest things that we work on, that there's just a grab bag of stuff that I think should come in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think building on that, and I think there's another foundational thing that needs to happen. What kind of application you're talking about is, while we're talking about AI here today, there are some fundamental digitization issues that we're facing as well. We have data sets all over the place. They aren't joined up. We have departments that don't communicate with each other. So maybe this is one for you, sorry, Sarah Jane, around what other kinds of digitization efforts should we be seeing alongside all this talk of AI to really make sure that we are set up well to progress into the future.
About skills. If anybody has ever done a quick Google search like I did this morning on what's the latest in the news of people talking about AI and jobs, I was always quite scared, like the robots coming for your jobs, like you're going to be unemployed. And actually this is only going to help people, and it's going to help people as we progress. We want to be the world leaders in the UK, and there's, I think, sometimes perhaps a little bit of apprehension about the upskilling. People know it needs to happen, but they're just a little bit scared about it. So I think there's a bit of an educational program, so everybody's happy and willing that, every industrial revolution, there will be a change, and we have to move with it, because that's just how the world works, and can't be scared about it. So maybe it's obviously starting in schools, but there can be lots that are done by employers. We've certainly done training in my communications, like public affairs agency, And this is obviously, I'm just a lobbyist, but at every level of government or organisation that you're in, just being open-minded to those skills. It doesn't have to be scary, and you're not going to just lose your jobs. You will just have a slightly different job, and that's not a bad thing. We should be excited for it.
Yeah. And what kind of investment do you see is necessary to really get these upskilling efforts off the ground?
Well, see, in the private sector, businesses need to accept that it's what they need to do to be successful going forward. Otherwise, they will be left behind, and they'll just cease to exist. I think I read something a few weeks back about the wool, I can't say it now, wool mills. It feels like a bit of a mouthful. And the women that were working on the spinners, this is obviously over 100 years ago, and as industrialization came in, everybody was really scared about they would lose their livelihoods. But actually the training was put in and jobs changed, and there was a little bit of soreness to begin with, but ultimately it was all fine, and we're in that same situation now. In government, just need to accept that you just need to invest in your workforce, which shouldn't be something that is controversial.
Yeah, and I think we have been learning also is making sure that your procurement professionals are also up to speed on what the technology is that they're procuring.
Yeah, and I think
as well.
Maybe people think that we're just trying to do too much too quickly, and actually that's not necessarily the case. It's not some really big thing that's going to be difficult to learn. Just be a little bit less scared. I just don't understand why people find it so difficult to just be a little bit less scared, and it will all be okay. And actually, it's a good thing to learn something new.
Yeah, lovely. Keeping on the topic with digitization and other digitization efforts, or did you have something? Maria?
Yeah,
sorry, go
I
ahead.
wanted to say that on the public perception, I've seen in the last year or so a number of surveys across the world, from Germany to the UK, from US, with different bodies try to understand what is the current perception on AI. And of course, 70 to 80% was highly negative. Play with ChatGPT have changed their opinion, and the fact that we are waiting in 2024 for AI to show its dark face and interfere with the election, it didn't happen. I've seen some reports conducted by Alan Turing where they showed that there isn't a correlation between the use of AI in misinformation campaigns in elections that have happened already, and the result. So let's see how we got through of November, but there is a big chance on this election cycle, AI was not yet that ready. It doesn't mean that it's not going to come for our election in 4 years' time. So that we should start preparing for that. But what we've learned from this is that once you start experimenting with AI, your perception changes completely. And I think we've been talking about AI upskilling in this country for since we started talking about AI policy at every level, in parliament, in the government, in civil society. And the reality is that AI is both the solution and the problem, meaning that is the problem that will generate such a profound change in society, but is the solution to help us navigate that. And I'm mind blown the creative ways people are using the chats like ChatGPT, from diagnosing a car failure to asking how to do something with the kids or name it. And suddenly people not only that start growing in confidence, but ChatGPT is their tool to educate themselves. It's not going to be enough, but that energy is being fostered, and we add some formal layer on top of it from the regulator side, from the governance side, for civil society, we'll see that energy being channeled towards helping that transformation. And I'm sure the schools will learn, because they have to, how to adapt their evaluation, because the students are so clever and now they use ChatGPT to shortcut every single assignment they have. So I'm hoping that we'll again start thinking about AI in different ways, in terms of upskilling, in terms of using it, and being a little bit less terrified of the risk, because from what we are using it, it's probably safe.
It's thinking of it as an assistive technology rather than a replacement.
Exactly.
Co-piloting.
And then co-piloting, that the genius branding, co-piloting, that is exactly what we should be thinking about, augmentation rather than replacement.
Wonderful. Well, we have about 15 minutes left, so we're going to turn to audience questions. So if you just put your hands up and then I will point out. So we had one in the corner back here next to the light switch. So we'll go 1, 2, and then take more questions.
Thank you very much. Gareth Hyde from IAB UK, the Trade Association for Digital Advertising. A couple of panelists have talked about not being afraid of AI and how it's already being used, which in our industry, the entire industry depends on AI and has done for a very, very long time. So I absolutely agree with that. To public service reform, and obviously so much public service depends on being able to engage and inform the public and being able to shape their decision making. That's obviously something our industry does all the time and uses AI for. It should be interesting to hear the panel's views on how sort of AI-generated messaging and personalisation of messaging could actually play a significant role in things like healthcare and prevention, environmental change, education, and such like.
Lovely.
Who wants to take?
I mean, just a very, very quick one is just understanding that AI-generated content isn't always a bad actor.
I was saying it was a good thing, absolutely.
Yeah, no, but I think like the public will perceive,
Yeah.
because there's been so much rhetoric about, or be careful, like this is an AI-generated video, this is AI-generated imagery, like don't get hoodwinked into thinking something else, and it's not always bad. And I'm not sure what the necessary solution is. It's just going to be a long process to make people feel okay. But they need to recognise what is good and bad in the same way that, you know, anybody could stand up on telly and say anything they want, and they don't have to be AI generated to say something that's bad and misinformation. So I'm sure you can all think of an example.
I think if your question is what's the potential for personalisation from AI,
Yeah.
I mean, I think the short answer is massive.
In public services, especially.
In the context of what we're talking about, you know, Maria mentioned the kind of breast cancer diagnosis tool, but you can imagine so much preventative work going to people of high risk profiles for certain things. People are also just much more likely to read letters that are really for them. You know, generic things that come from the council or that come from the government in whatever form tend to just kind of wash over people. But the more that we will be able to, and you know, of course, one of the areas that I think about here, which is potentially not quite public services, but from an electoral perspective as well, there's huge potential for personalisation in campaigning, which doesn't need to be for elections, could be for things like getting people to go to this screening or whatever it might be for their health. So I think the potential is huge because you can actually write things that are addressed to individual people. And I think people are much more likely to think, and I think there's some evidence for this, oh, I personally am being a high personal risk, rather than, everybody over a certain age or whatever. And then people just sort of put it off and they don't do it. So I think huge is the short answer to your question.
I've got something, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I think that's a really, really interesting point. And again, I would agree. I think that, however, that does also point to whether we will actually let personalization happen to that extent and let those productivity gains come. And I say this because I recently talked to a startup who was involved in a pilot program in the NHS who had a AI enabled test for fetal health. And they were brought into the pilot because they were going to cut the appointment time from half an hour to 10 minutes, which they did do. And they were not taken up by the NHS because what happened was the appointment still took half an hour. And the reason it took half an hour was because the doctors were then saying, well, we've done that. Is there anything else you'd like to talk to us about? Or maybe we would like to test for other things. Or is there anything you would like to talk to us about? So patient satisfaction went up, doctor satisfaction went up. And the NHS managers were going, yeah, but the appointment times have not got any quicker. So I do think, I completely agree, but I also don't, it's not going to be like, yeah, that makes it more personalized. But there's going to be so much else that comes into play.
Yeah, and I think that also points like it doesn't all have to be about efficiency. A successful implementation is not necessarily one that
Indeed.
just improves efficiency.
Indeed.
I would say personalization, yes, as long as it's labeled as AI-generated content. And I'm about to read a study. I haven't had time to read it. Apparently, since 2023, it's difficult to identify which content is synthetic and which one is human on the internet. So as time passes and we generate more and more content, synthetic content, there is a danger for everything that we read is generated by a machine. And then where does it leave us? So I think I'm a little bit concerned on one hand that we will read a little bit too much machine-generated content? Where does it leave the communication between two people, and also how much information we can process? I mean, I speak with my friends and they say the reason I like ChatGPT is because it helps me navigate a flood of information that's coming my way, which I cannot cope with. And I think this is again where AI is going to be the solution to the problem, meaning that how can we rethink the whole process in a way that AI can come and, instead of delivering written personalized content, think about the voice, how voice can be used. Now that voice has been I've noticed it in my ChatGPT that's being rolled in the UK. How can you use voice to actually start shaping a behavior that is more preventative in the case of healthcare or educational? I think the possibilities are immense. And the question is how ready are we to experiment and then leave behind the old ways of thinking and really open up to the opportunities AI is bringing.
Wonderful. We have, I think there was one more here, and then I saw this gentleman here is so number 3. If it's possible to direct further questions to a specific panelist so that we can try and get in as many as we can, that would be lovely. But yes.
Okay, Jim Clark. Yeah, I'll try and direct to Camilla, I guess. It is this sense of we work with a lot of science and innovation startups, many of whom try to pitch towards the public sector. And I really like what you said about the challenge prize idea, because I know some who've kind of given up on trying to engage the public sector because they just can't afford the compliance and all the form filling and doing all this work for effectively potentially nothing. So I want to kind of get, is there more that government could be doing on this? Is there a better kind of risk reward we could have on public sector procurement? Because the thing is we're especially adopting innovations. Not all of them are going to work. There is an element of, as Katie said earlier, we're never going to always adopt systems to work perfectly. The idea is we adopt better and better systems, have an iterative process. So I just wondered what the sort of startup coalition sort of views are on that.
I wish I had more in the grab bag that I could be like, yes, there's another challenge prize. I think that's a big part of it, and I think the other element is sharing best practice amongst government. So sort of bringing people's I was going to say culture change, but sort of making people feel more comfortable about buying technology. I mean, what's the old adage? No one ever lost their job by buying IBM. I think that's a big element of it. And then being able, I think, to have more sort of hackathons and more pitches where government can meet startups a little bit more and sort of start to break down some of those barriers. Right now, I mean, we do not have a big enough organization that we could do that, maybe in the future. But right now you've got Tech UK, for example, which is a wonderful organization with many different reasons, but you have to be a paying member in order to access their procurement conferences. And so I think there's also an element of sort of breaking down those barriers as well.
Wonderful. We'll do 2 more questions. We'll take them at the same time. So there's this gentleman over here in the blue tie, and then up front. So we'll 1, 2, and then we'll just answer that all together.
Great. So I'll address it to Sarah Jane, but I suppose not really just specifically to you. How do we get the? It's a general point. But how do we get the balance right between allaying those fears that you spoke about that some people have, and also tempering some of the maybe more exuberant excitement that I think we do sometimes see? I think a lot of people that seem to imagine that we can just immediately do everything, and there are limitations, and I think there are some temptations of people just to rely on ChatGPT, not check it, not look at whether it's hallucinated or it's written something sort of misleading. And so I just wondered, in terms of the public discourse, what the right approach is for us to get that balance right.
Okay, so we have balancing fears in public discourse and...
Hi, Tim Flagg, and I wonder if I could get a quick answer from everybody on the government's action plan, which they're due to publish next month or very soon. What's the one thing that you think what's the one thing that you want to see in that action plan that you think is going to be most transformative for getting AI businesses, allowing AI businesses to progress?
All right, love it. Fabulous. Shall we start with the balancing fears question then, and then we'll do a roundup on action plan?
I mean, honestly, I don't think there's not a one size fits all answer. I'm trying to think of the best analogy. It's a bit like baking a cake. You can't just chuck all of your ingredients in a bowl and then the cake is made, right? That's not how baking works. I don't know if you're a baker or not.
I know enough to know that.
Yeah. I think kind of thinking of it as like that is like things, you need to give it time. if you want the best possible product or end situation, is you just need to give it the time that it needs. You know, and don't be worried. Don't be too worried about like your cake coming out raw when you've baked it. Like I don't know if that's perhaps the best. All I can think about is food, just because it's getting to the end of the day and I've not had breakfast. It's the story of my life. I think we need to just have a continued conversation. Maybe that's a conversation that we need to have for another day and just talk about fear and allaying that with different people, because everybody has a different need. So somebody like my mum, for example, who's teaching assistant at primary school, will have a very, very different interaction with AI than I would. You know, I'd be building GPTs for clients so that they can improve their work, and not just. It is possible to break ChatGPT, by the way, and it's really fun to try.
Yeah.
We had a bit of a workshop in my office where we deliberately were trying to break it, and you could just see it having a mental breakdown. So I think just allowing people the time to play with it as well, which I know Maria, you'd sort of said before as well. Just that's probably babbling on a little bit, but
Yeah.
maybe Digital Tories will host another panel and you can come along and talk about it.
Some people might get in trouble by using ChatGPT, but that's the only way to learn. So our experience, like we've preached the gospel of responsible AI for many years and advised our clients about the risks of AI. They didn't pay much attention until they saw the headlines popping up with chatbot being discriminatory, with AI bias, AI hiring tool being discriminatory again, with all the Horizon scanning and the benefit scandal in the Netherlands. Suddenly they could see that this is real. So I think until we will see people, you know, getting in a little bit of a trouble, hopefully not too much, they probably won't get their enthusiasm curb. But I think it's only normal. It's like a journey we have to go, as Sarah Jane said, as a society. But I'm much more confident. Believe me, I've been in this story for 24/7 for 8 years now, and at times I've been depressed or where we're going. But in the last few months, my confidence grew because I've seen people embracing it and people bringing their best of themselves. And this technology making the difference. It's a very small difference, but you can see the light at the end of the tunnel with how people embracing it. And I think we are in a better place than we've been forever since I started I joined the AI ecosystem, whatever you call it.
Wonderful. Let's wrap up with this last killer question on government action plan on AI. What do you want to see? I challenge you all to doing this in 2 sentences. Who wants to start?
I'll start.
Okay.
We put in a long submission, and you know what? My brain is so fried I can't actually remember what everything was in it. But what I would say is, I think in this action plan, there's a lot that the government wants to do and they will not affect. And there's no reason really. I mean, they can't do anything about it. So what's one thing they could do? The heart at so much of AI is data. The government could release so much more data, and they could clean up a lot more data, and they could think about, you know, what they could do for licensing, for example. So I would just say data.
Love that one. Sarah Jane?
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree on that. Just giving people access to be able to play and try and make and break things so that you can work out what's going to work out best.
I guess my point would actually be related to that, which is more, I suppose, what I don't want to see than what I do, which is I really hope that it is not as risk averse as the sort of corresponding plans that we've seen in Europe. I think that would be a real shame. There's such a massive opportunity here, and particularly for us versus the continent. So I hope, which seems not unreasonable, because Matt Clifford is obviously sort of an entrepreneur himself and has, you know, one would imagine a kind of appropriate risk appetite for this kind of thing. But what I would like to see is, you know, a relatively ambitious degree of risk, because we are going to have to take on that degree of risk to innovate and to grow.
Thanks.
I would like to see a form of platform for engagement between the public sector and the SMEs. It's like formalize the innovation. I think if this country wants to remain a leader and continues to lead in AI, it needs to support the startup ecosystem. Without it, it's like we're not going to get anywhere. China and US are very far ahead, because where is the capital coming from? So I'm hoping this government will support innovation with AI, and the government itself, because it's such in desperate need for AI services, can be both a client and a supporter of the sector.
Great. Thank you. And with that, I think we are perfectly on time. So